Hello and welcome to this edition of Own the Journey, where we get to speak with incredible people from around the world. And today we have a special guest, Mr. Adam Markel. Adam, thanks for being with us. We absolutely appreciate it.
Oh my goodness, what a pleasure.
You're the CEO of Workwell. You're an author, a speaker. You've done so many things. So for those that don't know about you and your history, kick us off a little bit. What's your story?
Oh my goodness. Well, it's so funny. I'm a daddy. I'm married to my college sweetheart. We have 4 healthy kids, and I still think that is the most impactful thing that has been a part of my life is discovering the joy of having a relationship, a committed relationship for so long, and also being very lucky but blessed to have healthy kids and go through all that. I mean, it's just like life, it is a journey, and it's so funny that's in part what this podcast, this interview is all about, the journey. So
that's exactly right. So what beyond being a father, you've done incredible research. You've entered into this world of resilience. You've been an attorney. You even spent some time as being help me out, an ocean rescuer. So what led you down this path of really understanding what it means to kind of persevere through life and do it well?
Well, starting from this point, I'll move backwards in chronology or what have you. But I love business. I'm an entrepreneur, a serial entrepreneur since I was 14 or 15 years old, and I've had great fortune in being involved in some great organizations. Some that I became involved in as more on the employee side of things, on the leadership side, and then being able to form and be part of the formation of some really cool institutions as well. I was a lawyer for a couple of dozen years, and there's a book I wrote some time ago called Pivot, which is my journey. That's going to be a word that's sticking with me now, but my journey out of that particular occupation and the work I was doing there that was precipitated by a health scare, a very serious moment, which I later called a pivot. Yeah. And when I wrote that book, the word pivot was not nearly as popular as it is today. I wish I had a nickel for every time somebody's used that word pivot since then. But it really was a book where I describe sort of this moment of truth for me in finding that the livelihood that I had, what I chose for work in the world, didn't work well for me. It didn't. I was doing great work for clients. I prided myself on being a get it done no matter what, do whatever it takes to win at all costs. And my clients benefited from that. I used to sort of jokingly say that I would lie down on the train tracks for them, which there's a great lawyer joke involved in that, of course, right? And the good news is today I'm sort of a fully recovered attorney, but it was wreaking havoc on the inside for me, and so it was creating this inner turmoil. Really, the conflict between what I said was important to me, my values, or what I claimed were my values, and how I was actually living. So pivoting out of the law and that journey ended up leading me down this path of authorship. I wrote that book Pivot. It was a bestseller with Simon & Schuster some years ago, and then more recently I wrote a book called Change Proof. That's this book that's right here, which, as you said, is a book about resilience. And there's an interesting interplay there, just because in the book Pivot, there's a chapter on resilience. And later on, a couple of years later, I realized that even though the pivot, the ability to be agile, adaptable, flexible in your thinking, flexible in your actions and your habits and kind of everything, that while that was certainly a big part of my success in navigating difficult times, that the bigger story was really about resilience. So I needed to write a book where Pivot's more of the chapter the smaller story in the larger context, which is this idea of how do you develop mental, emotional, physical, and even spiritual resilience in a world of constant change.
Yeah, I think it's such a critical part of business. I mean, you and I have had a chance to kind of speak a little bit today, and what we know about business isn't just that you have to adapt and change and be resilient, but there's different phases of life that people go through that have different priorities, and I think organizations need to understand that, but I think it kind of starts with the individual understanding what their priorities are, and I think it's interesting that you realize that externally and internally you had a conflict there, and I think a lot of people maybe struggle with that a little bit. Like, I'm supposed to be successful in work, and this is what the world tells me I'm supposed to do, but this is where my heart is, or this is where my passions are, and sometimes that conflict really causes problems for people.
It does. So it's funny because the brand of the organizational development firm that I co-founded is called Workwell.
Yeah.
And you and I at lunch, we had that was an interesting thing that we were talking about Workwell and the idea of what does it mean to work well? What does it look like? And also alternatively, or conversely, what does it look like to work poorly? To have the environment and all of that not contribute to you being at your absolute best. And some years ago, on the research side, we developed a tool called the Resilient Leader Assessment, which is why I love this particular tool, is that it's just 3 minutes. Some of these assessments that people are deploying, and many of them are quite good tools, they can take a while. And I think sometimes people get a knot in their stomach when they're asked these days to take yet another assessment kind of thing. So this thing is 3 minutes, and what's great is that your organization took the assessment. In fact, we're going to be unpacking some of those results. But there's a couple of questions that are really important. The question 13 is one that is all about whether or not you're actively engaged in a livelihood that's in alignment with your core values and beliefs. I already know the results, the aggregated data from JMark, and the good news is yes. Pretty much everybody is. They feel as though they're in their right livelihood. There's not that disconnect that we're talking about. And the very next question 14 in this assessment says that there are some gaps, and sometimes significant gaps, between what we say is important to us and how we allocate our time, our energy, and even our resources. That was my issue. Couldn't have called it that back then. Didn't know it was that. Yes. But just felt miserable, angry, anxious, all that kind of thing. All that stuff. Those are the symptoms, but the root cause was something entirely different.
This conflict.
Yeah. So it's fascinating.
It is fascinating. So I think, somewhere you describe it as resilience. Grit is another popular term that people bring to the table, but I think part of what happens in this journey, if you will, is that people have to realize what's important to them, what their fundamentals are, and then align that with how they're spending their time, money, energy, and what careers they're investing in. For somebody who is struggling with that, how do you lead them through it? How do you coach them and say, like, you're in conflict, like, dude, you're out of whack? How do you reconcile that?
Well, because that's a deep discovery, and there's no one sort of one size fits all answer to it. But there is something that I think is really important there, and that is to sort of break myths, bust the myths that I think take people down these rabbit holes that are wasteful. They're wasteful of time and other things. And one of those rabbit holes is this work-life balance thing. And you and I are completely in alignment on this.
Yes, 100%.
In fact, I love to call BS on that because it is such a term. It's part of the vernacular of our world, of our work world, that people should try to find work-life balance, which is utter nonsense because you think what balance is. Just imagine, in my mind, when I think of balance, the image comes to me of somebody on a tightrope. Yeah. Because that's what balance looks like. Right. And can you do it? Can everybody, that's watching this right now is skilled enough to create balance in order to be able to, for a moment or two, stand on a tightrope? It's just not sustainable. Correct. And that's the issue. That form of balance, this idea that somehow or another, in these two silos that we call work and non-work, or our life and our work, that these things are somehow supposed to be measured in proportion to one another, like a scale, is ridiculous. Right. It's more about how we harmonize those things. Correct. How do we blend them? So that we can get the most effective results out of a a blend, and not everybody has that same blend. In fact, no two people typically have that same percentage of those things together, and how they actualize them. So, yeah, I think with somebody that you were describing, we want to take whatever the sort of the cliches and ideas like that, and look to turn them on their side, because it frees them then. Because if you're working from a paradigm that's not sustainable, you will most likely fail.
Right.
And that's what's frustrating. That's what people ultimately become despondent and even depressed over, because it's when you can't win the game, and you don't know why you can't win the game,
then you eventually give up on playing.
why play the game?
Yeah, that's right. Well, I think you've nailed it. I mean, I'm a big believer in this, as you know, that work is a part of life, but what percentage that is, to your point, is different for everyone, and it changes with the tides. I mean, there's time when you need to put more energy into work, and there's time when you need to put more energy into family or spirituality or your physicality, whatever it may be. And so to come up with that perfect harmony is impossible. So it's just about having a plan to balance the life as a whole in your current phase, if you will. Do you agree with that?
I do. Yeah, I think again, it's the language makes a big deal. It's a big difference to pay attention to the language, to pay attention to even what's your philosophy. I mean, that's what I love about J-Mark, and what I know of your leadership is really that it starts with philosophy. People. That people truly matter. People first. Yeah, and so that, philosophically speaking, I think that's that is it's what sets everything else in motion.
Yeah. So leaning into that for just one more question, do you think that because of what society or whatever have done to push this idea of work-life balance, that it's actually created an unhealthy thought process that is leading people down maybe dark paths or unhealthy thought processes or expectations that they can't win?
Yeah, absolutely do. Yeah. Again, because it's you're not really setting people up for success if you perpetuate a paradigm that no longer is relevant. And that one I don't believe was ever relevant. But I'll give you one that's more to the point, because you brought it up, the word earlier, grit.
Yeah.
So I'm a pretty gritty guy, and by that I mean I've been a whatever it takes guy, whether it was getting through school, which was not easy for me, or being in sports and being not the biggest guy on any team or any sport I ever played, but still managing to succeed, or in other areas of sales or in leadership or any of those kind of things. So grit has been important. I can grind, and I can grind with the best of them. And yet what led me into that really dark hole when I was a lawyer wasn't a lack of grit. It wasn't a lack of tenacity or perseverance or ability to grind. It was because of those things in many ways that created this Pandora's box for myself. And I think that's counterintuitive. Again, that's not necessarily what we are told or what we are shown by others around us. So resilience is not about grit. While it is an element of grit, it is not the most important one. Endurance is not what leads to greater resilience. It's not about how we endure. It's actually about our process for how we restore. It's about those rituals that you and I feel so strongly about.
Yeah, the morning rituals. Yeah. So that's incredible. So I know that there's some history in your wanting to pursue resilience because of your amazing wife, Randy, right? She helped you to kind of navigate through or see something. Share the story there.
Well, I'll give you the punchline of the story. She's an amazingly grounded person. She's the most grounded human I've ever known. So it was fortuitous, to say the least, that somebody was so ungrounded at the time that we met in college, that we were able to connect as we did and build a life together. But on one of these days when I had missed being home for dinner with the kids, coming back, commuting from my work as a lawyer in the city that I was, we were living around, but the long commute back, I missed the kids at dinner. And that particular night I walked in and it was a rainy, cold night. I'm dripping, and I looked at her face, and I knew as soon as I saw her face that the kids had already gone to sleep. So I didn't even have the opportunity then, like some nights, to even kiss them goodnight or read them a bedtime story.
Right.
So I walked up to her, and I looked her in the eye, and I said, if I keep doing what I'm doing, you're going to be a widow. And, that was sort of a, not a mic drop, it was like dropping a bomb,
for sure.
Because at that point we had a full-on complicated life.
Yeah, sure.
House and cars and 4 kids and gerbils and 2 big dogs and goldfish. I mean, we had a lot on our plate.
Right.
Yeah. But she took a pause, took a breath, and looked at me, and the only thing she said to me was, we'll figure it out. So I've always, and this is part of, in terms of our work in the organizational development space, we talk about this principle of having each other's back. What does it look like organizationally to know that everybody has each other's backs? Well, that's a great example in our little organization, our family, for what it looked like for her to have my back.
Yeah, that's so amazing. It's an incredible story. Thanks for sharing.
Thank you. I just got emotional just talking about it.
Yeah, I can tell. Well, that's tough. I mean, when you know that somebody has your back, you're not going into something alone. You've got that support system, that ecosystem that's so critical. And that oftentimes is the confidence that we need to keep staying resilient, to persevere, to navigate through the challenges so that we can get to the other side, whatever that may be.
Because there's no answer in the moment.
Yeah.
You don't have a certainty as to how things will work out or what the plan is going to even look like.
Yeah.
So but if you know that regardless of what the pivots along the path may be, which there will be many, especially in business, that the team that you have, the people in front of you and behind you and on either side of you have your back, and you've got theirs,
it's all good.
What can't you do?
Yeah, you can get through anything. That's powerful. It's awesome. So shifting gears a little bit, for those that are watching that want to navigate through authorship, becoming a speaker, and I know that it's a battle. I've lived through pieces of it. Sure. It's hard. Talk to us about your story, what you would recommend. How would you coach somebody to begin that pathway? Yeah,
that's a great question. I mean, there's a lot of, I think everybody has a book in them. So let me just start with that. Everybody's life is fascinating and more fascinating than they think it is. So my recommendation is that everybody write their book. It is not easy to write, and even though I'm an author and I've written several books, writing is torture. Can be. And the hardest part of it is just staying in the seat, just keeping yourself in the seat long enough to get words down on paper or on a screen. So my first advice there, or recommendation would be, if you've ever thought of writing a book, now's the time to just start writing a book. I mean, you and I were talking about, there's lots of people that can help you in that process. You do not have to go it alone. In fact, you shouldn't go it alone. Takes a village, for sure. Yeah. Every book I've done has taken a village.
I couldn't agree more.
Right?
100%.
Fantastic. So knowing that ahead of time, I think takes a great burden off the shoulders of a person who's thinking, hey, I might have a book. It's like, well, good. So amass or create a team around you of people who are willing to support that. And that doesn't, that could be so many different roles, for example. Even just somebody, for example, that would check in with you. Somebody that's going to hold space for you, be your buddy, like a buddy system, who's going to check in with you every week or every other week to say, hey, so tell me about how many words you've written. Tell me about how many hours have you sat in the seat. Yeah. Because without doing that, it won't happen. Right. So there's that piece of it. Our company in the past has worked with budding speakers who wanted to get on a TEDx stage. We love the TEDx stage. We love the message, the crystallizing a message, creating a very concise through line for 8 to 18 minutes, that kind of thing. Yeah. Which, if you can do that, you can keynote. You can create a talk that you could share on stages all over the globe, really, because that smaller, that shorter context to develop a message that has meaning is so tough. So the TED thing is really, it's a heavy lift.
Right.
Yeah. So to me, that's a great way to, jump right in, is to decide, I would love to develop a talk and then create sort of what we like to think of as the 3 C's of that talk. So it's what's the context? How do you create a context? What's the origin story, if you will? And ultimately, what's the continuity? Where the hero's journey goes from there, from that origin story. Where does it take you? What do you learn? And then ultimately, how does it affect other people? What's the community of people that are going to resonate with that message, and looking to serve them? So using that sort of simple but not necessarily easy structure to just formulate a talk that's anywhere between sort of 1,000 and 2,200 words, to be really granular about it, because we speak at about 100 to 130 words a minute kind of thing, and you're just thinking, if I'm creating an 8 to 20 or 8 to 18 minute long talk, this is the number of words that I'm going to be able to speak. Right. So you ought to know that going in, because and then my first TED Talk, I think the very first script of it was like 4,500 words. Wow. And then you have to do what Hemingway described in the writing process for fiction or any kind of writing, is you got to kill off your darlings. So chop, 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 all that editing of things that are not necessary, or things that are not, going to move the through line forward. Right. And all of that just, again, is just sort of painstaking and requires good feedback, honest feedback from people.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in truth tellers in your life, that you've got to have those people around you that are willing to tell you the truth even when you don't want to hear it.
Totally. Yeah. But the public speaking thing is a very worthwhile pursuit. I started out in that arena. I was standing on stages, talking to business leaders and organizations all over the globe, and then I found that I still wanted more from the effort that went in. I don't mean more money. I meant more follow-up, more continuity from myself. I wanted to be able to see if we are able to incubate an idea that people resonate with, then what does that idea look like 3 months from now, 6 months? And often, if there's no follow-up to it, the idea just sort of was interesting.
It soon goes away.
But then it's like, well, I remember that guy. He made me laugh. He made me cry. He motivated me. But more than that, I can't say. Right. So we formed this our brand Workwell as a means to continue the conversation with organizations, whether it be through coaching, or it's through creating team norms trainings, or curating content videos, helping them to basically champion this idea of resilient leadership, which is just another way for us of saying it's not just focusing on what are the weak links in the chain, but instead focusing on strengthening the entire chain.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, so backing into all of that, then everybody's got a story, everybody's got a book inside of them, and that could lead to something like a TED Talk, or even a community version of that. In Springfield, we have one with 417 Magazine. It's similar format, which I think is incredible. But kind of breaking that down, even if you're not going so far to write a book, if you want to get on stage, what I heard you say is start with part of your story, something that you're proud of, something that you persevered through that maybe others could benefit from, and then turn that into the TED Talk, even if it's not the full book to start with.
There's no straight line in the universe, and if you're uncertain about that, just like hold your arm up. Yeah. Because your arm is crooked. Yeah. So there are people who tend to think in terms of they're perfectionists, or they might not even admit that they're a perfectionist, but somehow or another in their mind they've got a story of how things should look and all that, and that should be clean and straightforward. And there's just no area of life endeavor or business endeavor to me that has been anything other than a series of pivots. Mm-hmm. So yeah, you start out with a plan, but ultimately, sloppy success, I think, is better than perfect mediocrity.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, sloppy success. I may have to steal that one.
I've borrowed it, you borrow it as well.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I think we said this at lunch, but Plato, I think, said, or is attributed with, you know, the idea that all learning is remembering. So a lot of what we're hearing is, it resonates because it makes sense to us. It's like, it's a reminder of something that on a common sense level, we already know. But we still need to be reminded.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the cool thing is you turn that into the follow-up process that leads to continuous results or feedback. And I think that's an important part of any mission is, you know, it's one thing, like you said, to have the moment, have the talk, have the inspiration, but you've got to have the follow-up and the constant encouragement, just like all school, like learning anything new, which is fantastic.
All the results are really in the follow-up. I've run sales teams, and we all know where people stub their toe in that arena is just a failure to follow up. So, yeah, it's just really important, I think, that we're not just ticking a box. Like I do get hired to come in because they're looking to motivate people or inspire them, and I don't turn down an engagement because that's their primary motive, because it's a good motive. But I crave a deeper connection, especially with organizations that are learning organizations. I can't impact the DNA of a company that doesn't lean in, to use your words, lean into learning. I'm looking for companies that lean into learning already, and then I get to, you know, contribute something to that.
Share something new.
Yeah, but that's not everyone. In fact, it's not to be cynical at all, but it's not the vast majority, honestly. Yeah,
I would agree with that. Well, talk to me about like personal branding. I know that's a part of the speaking journey, a part of the process that you have to go through for those that want to pursue those things. How do you begin to develop a personal brand, and how does social media play into it? How do you develop a strategy? And I think one of the things that, you know, from a selfish perspective that I struggle with is I don't love the idea of self-promotion. It's really hard for me. It feels bragging or braggadocious, if you will. So how do you navigate through being out there and being forward in that personal brand without coming across like an arrogant ass?
Yeah, that's such a great question. All right, well, I'm gonna start with what you said at the beginning, which is own your brand. We're living in a world right now where everybody is their own media company, and it might sound silly, but everybody has it has the capacity to have an impact on the world through their own personal brand. And so if you think of yourself as a personal brand, as if you were advising an organization or some startup venture, you would say, well, first things first, like, do you own your name? So go own your name, as in, you know, johnsmith.com.
Right.
Own your name as a URL. And if you can't get that because Smith is such a common name that someone else bought johnsmith.com, then get johnsmithspeaks.com or johnsmithwrites.com or something along those lines. I mean, just be creative about it. But the goal being not that you just pay the $10 to GoDaddy or whoever it is, and then your $8 a year, re-up, but rather you develop a website, you develop an online presence and a property that is your personal brand. And I love it when I see parallel brands. So, for example, a person and a company. And I think Tony Hsieh was a great example of that. Who was the late Tony Hsieh, was a co-founder and the CEO of Zappos.
Yeah, incredible.
Amazing. And his book, Delivering Happiness, changed my phenomenal of leadership. So he was on a parallel brand. And even Jack Walsh, phenomenal. CEO of GE, just like parallel brand, cross-pollinating each other. It's a and with somebody who's more of a traditional business leader like Jack Welch, you go, how do those two things live in a space where you don't feel as though you're being a braggart or you're being selfish? I think his vision wasn't just that his organization GE would, I think whatever their record of meeting their projections for quarter after quarter, which went into like the 40-something quarters or whatever under his tenure, right? But as I understand it, Jack had a love of education and wanted to advance leadership. Now, he had a big organization that he could advance leadership initiatives. I mean, GE is a massive company.
Sure.
But yet, his goal was to advance leadership beyond his own company and have a bigger ripple effect on the ecosystem of the world, even.
Right.
You know, and I think that's very cool. So all that to say, go back to your last point, which is that if your goal would be to create a ripple effect in the world, then one's own discomfort and sort of even the stories that we tell ourselves about how other people will perceive our actions is much smaller than the potential impact of the work that we do. So we got to get out of our own way in that respect, because I'm not an extrovert by nature. It'd be hard for people to believe that. I mean, I've spoken all around the globe, and 15,000 people in an arena in China that, I'm speaking, and then 20 minutes later Tony Robbins is speaking, and yet I'm not an extrovert. I don't know if he's an extrovert, frankly. I'm what a friend of mine coined this phrase some time ago. She said that I'm a situational extrovert, but I'm really an introvert. So meaning how I recapture my energy is not by being around a lot of people. It's being in more solitary or in small group. And that's when I recharge my battery. Whereas my brother, he's the opposite. He wants to be in a stadium filled with folks, or in a music venue or something.
Right.
And that's how he gains his energy. So to me, the reason I speak isn't to cause myself to discomfort. It's because the mission for speaking is bigger than my discomfort with myself.
And to know and believe what that vision is and what you're trying to bring in terms of value to others, it will outweigh it if your mission is pure and you're focused on giving more than you receive.
Totally. Exactly. If you didn't ask the question, but I'll say a lot of people don't speak because they're afraid of public speaking. Warren Buffett, I'm reading his autobiography right now, and he went to the Dale Carnegie School at a certain point because he was raising capital and having conversations with people, and he was completely inept. I mean, he was a genius, and people knew he was an oddball at that moment, but he had all the genius inside him for numbers and assessing and all these things that allowed him to be an oracle in business later on. But he had to learn how to get out of his own way when it came to just personal interaction and ultimately in speaking. But the trick there, if there's a hack at all, and I think it's a good one, is to remind yourself before you're going to speak that it's not about you. And if you can just remind yourself that it's about those people, and it's not about you, then your mistakes or not being perfect or whatever the situations are that arise. I mean, I've tripped getting on stage. I mean, literally full on, like Superman fall onto the stage. Everything that can happen happens in life and in business. But when you're not worried about public humiliation, when your fear is not about that, public judgment, but it's about service, to use your term, you get past that. Yeah,
that's good. And something that I try to share with people when they're speaking, especially when they're new to it, is everybody that's in the audience, they want you to be successful. It's not like that they're rooting for you to fail or screw up or mess up. They're anxious for you to succeed, and so you just have to remember that they're rooting for you. If you let them in. Yeah. That's very true.
Because if you're a pretense, we sometimes talk about the difference between pretense and presence. But if you're let people in, and if you don't try to hide things from them, so if you mess up, you own your mess up, and you as is it, and you then as they root for you. They want to see you succeed.
Yeah, that's awesome. So have perseverance, resilience, if you will, in navigating through your own head trash. Kind of throw it away and realize that the gift is in the service to others is bigger than what's holding you back. And so talk to us about social media. How do you take that into action? So there's getting comfortable with it, whether it's on stage or just kind of owning your own brand. But how does that transform into a social media presence?
Well, so you buy your URL, you develop your website, which I think again is just it's a fun thing to do anyway. It helps you to gain clarity, because if you have to write content for a site, it can't be TBD. It can't be whatever the Latin terms are that they put in the as the placeholder. Yeah. You actually have to put stuff in there, and then social media to me is it can be as complicated as you want it to be. There's a quote that's in your office about simplicity, and I think that, and I'm trying to get the quote in my head right now.
Yeah, it's a Da Vinci quote.
It's a Da Vinci quote.
Yeah, simplicity is the ultimate sophistication.
Simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. I think that's a true statement for social media as well. And so to me, if you're in business, then you start with LinkedIn. And you spend enough time focused on LinkedIn and your presence on LinkedIn, and you don't try to spread yourself too thin by trying to touch on other platforms necessarily. I think that's a platform that's pretty straightforward, and the kind of engagement that you can get by being consistent, I think, is that sort of snowball that just one tiny little roll of that snowball over time will produce this more exponentially sized thing. But you have to be consistent. And if there's probably one thing that gets in the way of people's success, and I don't know if this is more of a question, see if you agree with this or not, that people they think one way, they're determined and disciplined for some period of time, and then they stop and they change their direction. You see it every year at the end, right around New Year's, and people make their resolutions, and 3 weeks later, all the gym memberships are now empty gyms or less crowded gyms, and all those kind of things, because people will make a commitment to something, and then their word is not law in the universe. They give their word to things and then take back their word, which creates a vicious cycle of sorts, because I think when your own word doesn't mean anything to you, you don't trust yourself. And the law of transference is, to me, clear that other people won't trust you, and they won't even know why. So, to me, if you say, I'm not gonna, I don't know, whatever it might be, I'm giving up my diet soda. I don't care about diet soda, but if you say you're going to give up your diet soda, then give up your diet soda. Right. That's it. Period. Yeah. Till you decommit. Yeah. And but anyway, I won't digress down that hole. It's a deep hole, because again, it just has to do with our personal philosophy. Yeah. Well, I think what I want to say just is I love that J. Mark, the philosophy that comes from you and the other senior level leaders, I think is a philosophy that helps to meet people where they are. Right. So that you help them to grow. So if it's about, hey, I don't really, my word doesn't mean that much. I mean, it's tough. It's a tough judgment and assessment, but yet your word could mean a lot. 6 months from now or a year from now, your word could be entirely different than it is today. Yes. Right? Nobody's a lost cause. I 100% agree with that. I love that, and grateful that we get the chance to help people navigate through it. I think one of the things that you said that resonates with me substantially is like, what does your word mean to you? Like the truths or the commitments that you make to yourself. If you can't keep your word to yourself, who are you going to keep it to? And I think that, fitness is obviously one of the easiest examples to use, because,
I will go for months and months and months and have a perfect workout record, and life gets busy, whatever, and I'll come up with an excuse of why I can skip it today or whatever, but it turns into a new set of bad habits, and it's harder to get back on the train again. And so I think having the tenacity and the commitment over time to do things consistently is what wins any race, and whether it's in business or whether it's in sales or whether it's in leadership, you've got to be consistent.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And also not to overdo it.
Yes.
Because we obsess. I think we have lots of things that we are sort of addicted to, and one of those addictions for people can be this sort of all or nothing approach to stuff.
Yeah.
Right. So then, and that's where our work comes into play as well, because we meet a lot of people who are mentally, physically, emotionally, even spiritually on some level, in a state of sort of overwhelm.
So back to simplicity.
Go back to simplicity. Exactly. Yeah.
Simplicity and consistency, and you can solve a lot, whether it's LinkedIn or whether it's the rest of your life.
Exactly. Yeah. LinkedIn's a great platform, but they're not the only one. And the other thing you should ask yourself is, what platform do you enjoy? Because if you don't enjoy LinkedIn, if that's not your bag, then I wouldn't suggest that you start there. I mean, if you're somebody that digs TikTok, then or whatever your platform might be, then go where you're already have an emotional connection.
Your heart is, yeah. I love that. So when it takes to transforming that into content, do you feel like stories are the better way to go? Lessons learned? What are some things that you're putting out there that are meaningful for folks?
Yeah, stories are the way I learn. I remember more things when I remember it through a story. So it's just my learning style. Yeah. So I can't speak to everybody's feeling about that, other than just that a good story is great in and of itself. People will stay tuned
to a good story.
To a good story. So even if it's not their preferred learning style, they'll stay with you. And content is meant to be consumed. So if you create content, nobody consumes it, or they consume only a small fraction of it. If you imagine yourself as a chef and you prepare this great meal, and somebody sits down at the table, takes half a bite, and gets up from the table. Yeah. What a waste.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So content, I think, has to have a quality to it that is a bit sticky, that has a hook, that is not, maybe provides insights, but isn't lecturing. Yeah. It doesn't feel like I'm being taught something right now. I'm being educated, and so I feel like it's very important that you're not in your style of presentation, that you don't do what's obvious in speaking, and these things kind of overlap a lot, but a lot of content is video content, so it's very, very much about that. The worst thing that you can be as a speaker is to be predictable. That is the worst possible thing, because if you are predictable, meaning that your tone, your cadence, your pace, your volume, whatever it might be, that it's predictable, you are boring in that moment. You're dull. And you're already competing with so many other things for the attention of those folks that might be watching, listening, sitting, etc. That it's just predictability. So you got to work on your variance, and content's the same thing. Vary your style of delivering content. Cool. And if you do that, if you think about, not so much creating a recipe, but rather asking, what would I be interested in? And sometimes you're not the demographic either, so you're going to ask, what's somebody in that demographic, which means involving other people and getting their feedback. And it might be painful to say, hey, what do you think of this paragraph here? What do you think of this header, or this subhead, or this statement? And if they don't get it, if it doesn't resonate with them, if they don't, then that's potentially some really good reason to go back to the drawing board and try it again. Same thing with your on-camera stuff, that it's important to get feedback from other people, and I would say in that area, what we often will do is we'll teach teams. We'll sometimes speak on psychological safety as an example, and a big part of an organization and its leadership creating an environment of psychological safety is people feel able to be seen and heard, and if they and where mistakes are made and how those mistakes are dealt with has a great deal to do with whether people will trust in that environment and feel safe. And on a very sort of foundational level, it comes to how do you give feedback to people, because you can't just sort of allow things to devolve on their own. You need organizational structure, you need discipline, you need to look over results and figure out what's happened. So a feedback loop that we use is what worked for me, what didn't work for me, what could be done differently. It's 3 statements, but we teach that if you use these 3 statements pretty much in any form of feedback, so even, for example, hey, I've just done this video, I would love for you to give me feedback on it, and here's the system that I want to use for that feedback. Well, what I want you to tell me is what worked for you in what I shared, what didn't work for you, and what could be done differently.
Yeah, I love that.
And what's amazing about it is obviously you're starting with what's worked, and that's positive, and it's not BS, it's like genuinely this is what worked for me. And it's not what worked, period, because that's a judgment itself. So what worked for me is a perception. It's my perception. It might not be someone else's perception. But it's mine. It's valid, and I'm sharing it with you. From a place of from the heart. Feedback to me is supposed to be additive. So much of feedback that I've seen, and why people are so shy to get it, don't want those annual reviews, or so many areas where get feedback. It's like I'd rather take I'd rather drink poison than get that, right? Because they know it's going to be criticism. It's going to be judgment on some level. But when you trust that the feedback is not going to steal something from you, take something away, but is in fact adding something to you, then you crave it because it's a way to improve.
Yeah, I love that. Well, that leads me to a question I had for you. As you think about resilience and navigating through kind of the tough times, what's a failure in your life that has led you to ultimately what is now a success, or you look back on it and it's like, if I wouldn't have had that failure, I wouldn't be where I'm at today? Yeah,
a failure. I failed so many times I wouldn't even know where to begin.
I think we all have. I love that sloppy success. That's what the failures are, the sloppy success.
I guess if I'd have failed and then stopped believing in my ability to succeed, that ultimate failure would have been, I would have just stopped. And on some level, it takes a bit of audacity, arrogance, ego, I call it anything you like, to get back up and want to be on the horse again after you've been bucked off.
Being a stubborn ass,
But that, I think, is essential. I've been willing to be a stubborn ass a whole lot of times, so that would be my answer.
I like it. All right, well, one of the things we always like to wrap up with in our videos is what's one of the pieces of advice that you've received that's been really helpful to you?
My dad said to me when I was somewhere in my early teens to trust my instincts, and I still feel very much an intuitive-led leader. I trust my gut. I ask other people about their gut, and I do that because I feel like if I trust my gut and they do as well, then I'm interested in what their gut's telling them.
I love that. Well, thanks for being with us today. Thanks for speaking with us this evening. Appreciate everything, and I'll raise a glass to you and say congratulations on owning your own journey.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you.